Hello and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be going over the events of July 16th and skim over some of the events of the 15th. So I want to start with the Kherson region. Of course, no frontline changes, but I do want to go over a major strike that occurred on Mykolaiv yesterday. And in Mykolaiv, there was a strike on the National University of Shipbuilding, and it was targeted towards the National Guards units there, and they sustained some heavy casualties. There were about 20 explosions in the city yesterday, and then the industrial area of Mykolaiv was hit again today. And this is a recurring theme. Every day we're seeing increased strikes, specifically on Mykolaiv. But this is not necessarily because of Ukraine's aspirations for a offensive towards the Kherson region, because now we're hearing that the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, he's saying that there will not be a southern offensive towards the oblasts Kherson and Zaporizhia. There will not be any Russian, any Ukrainian attempts at retaking these oblasts. Because before there were talks about like a million-man army that Zelensky was drawing up, and he wanted to send them to retake these oblasts, but um, both Zelensky and Reznikov understand this is not tenable. This will never come into fruition. So now he's clarifying his stance and saying that there will never be this offensive, or at least for now there won't be this offensive. And he's also said that he hopes that Ukrainian casualty counts are not under 100,000. So think of it like this: if he's not even sure that the casualty number is under 100,000, if that's just something that he's hoping for, which would be more of like a not a best case scenario, but a good scenario, then think of the actual Ukrainian casualty count. And I'm not just saying deaths. Think about the wounded, um, irretrievably wounded, people who will never be able to return to the front lines, people who are taken as prisoners of war, missing in action, people who deserted, all of that. So apparently, those casualties amount to the tens of thousands, which is not good for Ukraine. And Reznikov, he also, to be fair, he says that he thinks that the Russian casualty counts are over the 16,000 estimate that the United States gave. He says that it's probably much higher than that. Well, and anyway, we have the strikes on Mykolaiv, and we have other strikes targeted towards Odessa. So on the 15th, pretty sure it was, there were, and on the 16th, there were strikes in Odessa. So specifically today, there was a strike on the industrial area of Odessa near Babel Street, and there were some huge fires over there. It took a while for the firefighters to put it out. And there were some other strikes on some ammo depots in Odessa. And yeah, this is a pretty, just with Mykolaiv, there's a recurring theme with these major cities getting struck each time. So yeah, that's what's going on in the southwestern section of Ukraine. Now let's go on to the Donetsk front, and there's finally some changes to the front lines around Avdiivka. So remember when I was talking about how Russia could potentially close this cauldron by sort of advancing from their positions around this road connecting Avdiivka to like all these other cities around here in Donetsk. So now it seems that Russia is actually following through with this plan, because we have reports that they've captured Kamyanka over here, which is a really small town, don't get me wrong. But nonetheless, you could say this is a game, because there's been huge amounts of trench warfare in this area. And because of that, the lines have been really static. Russia is not investing a lot of their reserves or their reinforcements towards this sector of fighting. But that doesn't matter, because now they've actually gained a foothold, and they can, as I was saying, use this momentum to push forward from the north, and potentially they could also attack from Visele and then sort of encircle Avdiivka in this cauldron over here. That's basically the plan right now. And they also have full control of the road that is from east of Avdiivka, crossing through Kamianka all the way to this city right here, Kostiantynivka. So that city specifically, I just want to mention the city. Apparently, there were dozens of Ukrainian vehicles in Bakhmut, and they were reported as withdrawing from the city or on this road towards Kostiantynivka. So this city is of some importance. It is sort of a junction in between some of the major front lines, and that's why we have been seeing some major shelling of this city specifically. We've also seen on the Bakhmut front that a lot of the brigades from the west, specifically the 241st Territorial Defensive Brigade, it actually left the city of Bakhmut, 45 of its fighters, because they didn't want to partake in the fighting around the eastern parts, probably because of the animosity between the western parts of Ukraine and the eastern parts of Ukraine. And that sort of goes along with this theme that a lot of these fighters are not from the eastern regions of Ukraine. They're more from the central and western parts. And that's sort of causing some bad blood and schism between the populations. So in Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, there were Russian reports that the civilians were being forcefully evacuated from these cities, and I'm not sure if that's actually happening, but it would make sense because there is a lot, especially in Kramatorsk, there is a lot of pro-Russian sentiment within the local population. There were protests in support of the Russians, and then also in Slaviansk. Slaviansk is where the entire like DPR anti-Maidan movement was really started. So you do have a lot of pro-Russian civilians in these areas. Even in Siversk, there were videos of Russian speakers who were refusing to leave the city itself. They wanted to stay there in anticipation of the DPR reaching the city. So now let's move on to the cauldron around the Ulegorsk power plant. So I just want to say that we finally have a video of this power plant, and that's pretty big news because I haven't seen any videos from this entire area. The first actual video of the situation was posted today, and it showed Ukrainian forces still there, so we know for a fact that they haven't left and that the fighting is still continuing in the area. And they seem to be in a pretty catastrophic state in the video. The entire like plant was ransacked, which makes sense because Russia's been shelling it like crazy for a while now. But either way, it's still under their control, which is surprising to me because I would expect them to withdraw to a more defendable position. So yeah, we are seeing that Ukraine still has a presence there. I don't see them withdrawing, but Russia is within the like, outskirts of the city. They're very close to actually reaching the the plane itself. There were reports from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense saying that there was an assault on the plane, but we don't know if there's any success on that front. We also know that they were reporting an assault in the direction of Novoluhansk, which is an important town that Russia needs to take before they can really close this entire cauldron for good. We also know that Russian Ministry of Defense saying that they're reaching Kodema over here and Semihirja over here. So these towns, they're just like some minor towns that the Ukrainian positions here need to be dislodged before Russia like then closes this entire cauldron, and then advances towards Bakhmut. So we'll see what happens over there, and that sort of goes hand in hand with Russia's attacks on Vesela Dolina Zaitsev, and all these other minor towns south of Bakhmut. So we will see sort of in the future coalescing of the front line around here. That's my prediction, at least, like this. And then maybe if Russia thinks strategically, instead of assaulting Bakhmut, they go around here and they try to cut the road between Kostiantynivka and Bakhmut. I don't know how successful they would be at that, but if it was possible, I would do that because then you'd have this huge agglomeration of forces around Bakhmut that can be surrounded potentially, and that would wreak huge havoc on the Ukrainian forces. But that's in the future. Now we're seeing fights in Solidar on the eastern outskirts. Finally, we're seeing specifically a lot of fighting around the gypsum plant, which is right around here. Uh, Small scale LPR DPR shelling of this area was recorded on video, so we do know that they're in this area. So we'll see if they actually penetrate Solidar from the road that they're fighting on right now, or if they do something else, which I've noticed, which is they go and flank Solidar by attacking Yakovlivka over here, and then they can, if they take control of that area, they could assault Solidar from here and force them to withdraw. There are even some pro-Russian sources that are saying that Russia already has control of this northern part of Solidar. I don't think that's true, but it does show that it's on the Russians' mind that they want to reach the city in that direction. I also want to say that I made this adjustment around here on the map, around the Solidar and um, the line between Berestove and Solidar, which is still holding strong, admittedly. And that's a pretty big deal for Ukraine that they've been able to hold on for so long. But yeah, here in the city, not city, it's not a city, has like, what, 2 blocks in it? No, it doesn't really matter, but there were videos of shelling by the Ukrainians yesterday. So even the Ukrainian sources are now admitting that it's under Russian control. Like I saw a live UA map, they were talking about it. So yeah, I just changed the map accordingly. We're also seeing that Russia is going to start ramping up attacks on positions all along the Ukrainian front in order to prevent Ukraine from shelling Russian territory. That's become a pretty big imperative of the Russian forces. So specifically, we're seeing that Russia is ramping up offensive operations around Vimka. They're not actually in control of Vimka, to my knowledge, or of Ivano-Derivka just yet, but we do know that there's fighting around here. Once they finish up with these 2 towns, though, the goal, as I've been saying for a while now, is to reach Zvanivka. And now let's go to Siversk itself. We know that even after all the events around Siversk, all the conflicting reports, it's still under Ukrainian control, Siversk, and not even like the eastern districts are under Russian control just yet, because even the Russian sources, the ones that I've been reading, they've been admitting that the heights to the east of Siversk are still under Ukrainian control. So you do need to like reach these heights and occupy them before you assault the city head on. But what the Russian sources are saying is that they're not going to storm Siversk um, in the same way that they stormed Propasnaya, for example. They're sort of going to emulate what happened in Lysychansk and sort of make the conditions ripe for an encirclement. So then that they sort of forced Ukraine's hand into withdrawing, and that's what I think is going to happen. I think that it's going to be similar to what happened in Lysychansk, and I do think it will happen before the end of the month. Um, so we'll see if I'm right about that. And now I'm going to go to the Slaviansk sector, and on here, interestingly, there was a report that around Bohorodishny that the 95th Air Assault Brigade tried to cross the Donetsk River in the forests around the town, maybe like around here, but the Russians pushed them back from their assault. That also shows that how close Ukraine really is to the Donetsk River, because I used to think a month ago or so that Russia really had an inflated bridgehead around this entire area, and that they were just on the periphery of Sloviansk. But a lot of people have been adjusting their maps um, to show that Prisheb and Sirove are, and even in Tetianivka are still under Ukrainian control. And they might be right about that. I'm not going to change it just yet because I've been seeing like a lot of fires in Sidorove specifically. So maybe that's just Russian shelling from afar, or what I think is going on is that Russia is fighting there, and then those are the fires. And the reason why we don't see fires in Prishib or Titianivka is that they're under Russian control already. But it is possible that you have some like recon units um, in these areas that for a while they were scouting around here, and then finally they just left because they didn't have the forces to really take over this area. Even a lot of Russian sources are already admitting to this. So we'll have to see if I was right or wrong about that. And here I'm going to just show this adjustment that I made to the map. I gave all of this area to Russia just to show that there's fighting going on the outskirts of Adamivka, Ivanivka. So maybe Russia has given up on trying to advance on Sloviansk from the northeast, and now they're trying to do it instead from the northwest. So uh, that's a possibility. I also want to talk about the fact that there were reports that Russia is preparing for an assault on Barvankova, and I'd be interested in seeing whether this actually occurs because Barvankov, there were reports like many months ago, maybe April or May, that there was an advance on Barvankov, and that's why my prediction for the battle of the Donbass, I was saying that Russia would take the town by now, because I was of the belief that it would actually be attacked, but it hasn't been evidently because Russia's concentrating most of their forces, their sectors of fighting, which is understandable. But yeah, I admit I got that one wrong. But we'll see now if the tide actually turns and maybe Russia comes back to their position in Kuralka and starts actually advancing in this part of the in these like border regions between Kharkiv and Donetsk. So now let's go to Kharkiv, and in Kharkiv, I marked that Dementivka as under Russian control fully due to some reports from pro-Russian accounts that it was fully under the control now, and the fact that Ukraine was shelling the town. So in regards to the wider Kharkiv front, you just had some the strikes that are given on Kharkiv itself, on Dirachi, Pisachin, Tsirkoni, all these suburbs of Kharkiv, and we don't see many changes besides the fact that both sides are now building observation posts along the front line, specifically around here and here and here. So that's just a given in a warfare. You also have both sides building UAVs, and they will be deployed to sort of spy on the other side's positions. You even had a Ukrainian UAV or actually it was a drone. So this drone, it was flying over Ukrainian territory, from Ukrainian territory to Russian territory. Pretty sure it fell in a library in Belgorod and didn't cause any damage. So that's pretty funny. But yeah, nothing too big on the Kharkiv front. But there were some other airstrikes that were pretty big. 2 days ago in Venetia, there was a strike on what Russia calls a command center, a decision-making center, as Putin dubbed it. And basically, what they allege is that there was a meeting going on between the Ukrainian Air Force and foreign representatives that were discussing the transfer of air air defense equipment and like Air Force equipment to the Air Force of Ukraine. And that's when Russia struck this building. And you can see the images. The ruins are insane because it was struck by a caliber missile. And these cruise missiles are very effective and they cause substantial damage, which is why we had 23 people killed in the strike. I looked at the obituaries, and there were some among the dead that were members of the armed forces of Ukraine and the Air Force and all of that. So it is true that this was a military site, and you even had videos of Ukrainian troops running around after the aftermath of the strike. So yeah, it is I could see how it's a military target, but of course there were civilian casualties, including a 4-year-old girl, which is absolutely horrible, and it's really sad when you see that sort of stuff happening in war. So in response to that, Highmars were launched by Ukraine towards the LPR, and they struck specifically at um, Stak Staknovi, and then at Alchevsk. And the two missiles fired at Alchevsk, they were intercepted by air defense systems. But then the ones in Staknovi, they hit ammo depots. So we're seeing the continuation of Ukraine's utilization of the Highmars, and we're seeing that America will continue to ship Highmars to them. They're even giving Ukraine the green light to use these Highmars weapon systems on Crimea, which is within their range, because if like Ukraine is around here and then they just like fire towards Crimea, like they have a good field of range, because the front line in Kherson is about like um a couple hundred kilometers away from Kherson, which is within the field of range for the HIMARS, and that's also why Ukraine deployed at least one HIMARS system to Sumy very recently around here, and that could hit Kursk. So think of the damage that could be done there, and that's the real reason why the Russians want to heat up the airstrikes first of all, and also the ground war, because they want to create a buffer now between themselves, their actual borders, and the Ukrainian strikes. So another thing that I found interesting is that apparently, and this is actually confirmed by some Ukrainian sources as well, that there's one HIMARS system in the hands of Russian forces, which is pretty that's pretty cool. And the way that happened is that there was a HIMARS system stationed in Sumy, in the Sumy region, not necessarily in the city Sumy, but in the region, and apparently some corrupt like Ukrainian officials, or maybe they weren't even officials in the government, but in the military, they sold it to the Russian forces for about $800,000 dollars, and then like $300,000 for each missile. So um, apparently, and this was something that even Sarah Ashton Sirleaf said, and she's on the front lines herself. So like she has some pretty good contacts in the area. So I would trust what she's saying, especially because like on the other side you have like Rybar reporting the same thing. So yeah, Russia has one Highmars system. We'll see what they do with it. And I just want to go over some one more announcement from the Russian Ministry of Defense about destroyed Ukrainian weaponry. So they say that in the Mykolaiv front, two MiG-29s were shot down, and that one Su-25 was shot down in Siversk region. They also say that in the Donetsk region, two helicopters were shot down, and then another 14 UAVs. And in total, around the front line, there were 59 UAVs that were shot down. And additionally, in Siversk itself, according to the Russian sources, 600 Ukrainian forces over the past 48 hours have been quote unquote destroyed. I don't know if that means killed or wounded or POWs. Um, that means that they won't be in operation anymore. That's for sure. And they were from the 115th Mechanized Brigade, and that's just jarring because that's on one front from one brigade. So think about the amount of casualties in general. It's been pretty high recently. And the final thing I want to say is that in um, in regards to the gas situation around the world, because it is important to talk about this because it goes in tandem with what the events still unfolding in Ukraine. So you know how Gazprom, they were shutting down their operations in a lot of these Western countries, especially in Europe, and that was a recent announcement that there's especially now in Germany that it's a big problem as winter is just around the corner, and according to reports, the German energy company Uniper, they are tapping into their emergency supplies of natural gas, and that's of course as a result of Gazprom closing services to Germany. And meanwhile, Biden, he's visiting in Saudi Arabia for the mainly for the purpose of securing higher amounts of gas production. And what Saudi Arabia is saying is that they can increase production from 10 million barrels per day to 13 million barrels per day. And I would consider that a pretty big failure because that's not sufficient for if first of all America wants to lower their own gas prices and increase supply in general, and if they want to start like shipping those supplies to Europe, so they're gonna have to start looking to other places, and then at the same time, Cuba, they're getting 700,000 barrels of oil from Russia. So Russia continues to have a very good supply of oil, and none of the NATO countries will be able to reap the benefits of that. So that's it for today, and I'll see you tomorrow.